Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I cannot wait to really embark on this new type of interview with tonight that to help you discern. Like instead of just giving you a bit of information here or there, this is really a night for you to gain some great knowledge from Dr. Mark Glafke, who's with Hearts and Souls.
Souls and Hearts.
Souls and Hearts Ministry. I knew that was going to happen. Souls and Hearts Ministry, who works with seminarians and religious information to help them work through issues that they may be having during discernment. And so this is something he specializes in. And I asked him to come on with you to help you. I said, it's so many people are like, oh yeah, this is a big issue. Yeah. Oh, that's one too. But then there's no resolution. There's no way to work around it or to work through it. And so that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So I'm excited about that. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Glafke.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm really grateful to be here.
So can you tell me and us about a little bit about yourself? How you came to be with Souls and Hearts Ministry?
Sure. I kind of had a winding route to just the field of psychology in general. And one of the many reasons why I was interested in meeting and being with you all tonight is that, I can relate. I had my own torturous path of like discerning religious life and whether or not to enter seminary, whether to be married, and had like two separate occasions where I almost entered seminary and did not ultimately. So a lot of issues that we'll discuss tonight, like I can personally relate to the stress and the worry, and all rooted in a good desire. But
did you ever get to the point whether you thought of seminary, like diocesan priesthood or religious life, or was it diocesan mostly?
Oh, I was all over the board.
Like so many.
Right. I was landing on the diocesan, diocesan life, and that's where I was going. And my mother was fully on board. Dad completely against it, but he was just softening up. Like he was just becoming accepting, and then I pulled the rug out from underneath him and told him I really discerned that God was not calling me to religious life or to priesthood, and so God bless him. He tolerated that. But I ended up in psychology. I was studying psychology while I was discerning as well. But I'm glad that I stayed on the road that I had chosen. And what happened was that I went to a secular graduate program. So I went to Purdue University. It was not being trained in a Catholic version of psychology. And so after I graduated, I was really looking for really some help, some instruction, even apprenticeship with Catholic psychologists. And thankfully, the Lord led me to one in particular, but then through him, several others that really kind of took me under their wing. And I worked with them briefly, or at least long enough to really learn a integrated model of Catholicism. And that included completing personality and psychological assessments for men and women seeking entrance into religious orders, where they were cloistered orders, missionary orders, or diocesan seminaries, or male religious orders. So great exposure and great experience with a broad array of men and women, different ages, everywhere from like graduating high school to those that had, had a 30-year career and, deciding to try, they want to enter religious life, and just coming across so many different struggles on a psychological level, situational factors, and I think a lot of things that even during the assessment, even though they were choosing to enter religious life, they were still struggling with, still kind of tortured by, in terms of like, number one, feeling they had to go into religious life. Like part of them felt, oh, I have a free option, but there's another part of them in a way that was really doing it for a variety of reasons, maybe to feel that God could love them, particularly given maybe their past histories. They had a lot of guilt and shame about things, or just maybe in general never really felt unconditionally loved or accepted by parents, peers, and thought, okay, well, here's a way I'm gonna do this amazing thing, right? You know, marriage is great, but religious life feels like it's like up, you know, way up here. And if I can do that, I'll have this confidence as I can look in the mirror and trust that God loves me. And I've worked with a lot who are now on the other side of ordination, and it didn't actually take care of that in and of itself. So I do have a private practice where I work with mainly adults, men and women, and couples. I complete a lot of religious assessments. So far this year, I've completed about 30 for various orders and dioceses. And then I'm a consultant for Mundelein Seminary, north of Chicago.
So how long have you been assessing men and women into religious life?
Almost 10 years. Yeah, so it was not what I knew that I wanted a Catholic-based practice. I kind of figured I'd probably do maybe 3 or 4 of these assessments a year tops, like maybe from my local diocese. And then one thing kind of led to another. And the assessments I complete are really a deep dive into various aspects of the person's personality that isn't just simply about, you know, are they at risk maybe for engaging in some scandal, or they're, you know, really obvious psychological impediments, but really using the assessment as a roadmap for them to understand various aspects of their personality that they're going to have to work on: their self-image, how they relate to others, you know, can they resolve conflicts, what things cause stress, you know, how do they respond to stress in healthy and unhealthy ways, their style of thought, all these things that they're going to need to target information, not just to survive, but thrive, right? Really like become happy, healthy, and holy women and men, and help them feel a confidence in their discernment. Like, this is, I can't imagine not doing this, and I love it, so that, you know, they're just have greater and greater freedom to love more, to love those that they serve, to really receive the love of God, develop a greater relationship. And if they discern out, then they're going to be amazing in another vocation, because they're just healthier overall.
Absolutely. So, so what do you think then? We're going to talk about several of the challenges, the main challenges that you see from women specifically. That's why we're here, ladies. For you, what are some of the biggest challenges for them?
Well, overall, I'll start with, I think it's applicable to women and the men, but it's just simply like wanting to know what God has chosen for them. Mm-hmm. And it's, yeah, I think really what it boils down to is most people end up approaching it as if God is like having this sort of like cosmic game of, you know, select my will. You get to choose between, it's like, I use the example of like, it's like he holds out his 2 hands, and then, you know, this hand here, which is labeled like marriage, and this hand, which is labeled religious life. And one of my hands is a ball that says my will, and you get to pick. And it's like, well, I really feel called to marriage, so I'm going to pick that. And God's like, oh, sorry. My will was actually in my other hand. So good luck to you. I gave you these great gifts of discernment and a religious community around you, a parish community, and time and adoration. You should have figured this out. So hopefully you'll get to be somewhat happy in this life. And at the end of it, you know, you live well enough so you can end up with the sheep and not the goats. And I think where people get stuck the most is trying to believe that God actually allows them to choose. He might be calling us, but we also need a free will response to that. He's such a loving Father. He doesn't want to like put something on us that's going to make us miserable, just simply so we can do amazing things. We can do amazing things regardless of the vocational path. Both are avenues to heaven, and both are really difficult. if you do them well. And I think for the women, there's a particular challenge in terms of like that draw towards marriage and being, the natural fulfillment of being a mother and giving life that way, and being loved. And I think for people in general, I think particularly the women that I work with, and this has been increasing over the years. I haven't been practicing for 80 years, but I know over the last 80 years, particularly with the continual breakdown of the family, you're just seeing devastation in terms of individuals doubting that they're really cared for. They don't have access to the parents. If they do, their parents aren't emotionally available, or they experience them in conditionally loving ways. Like they get attention and affirmation when they do something amazing, or they're just simply avoiding their anger, disgust, frustration, and they're seeking something in their life to show them that they matter. And for most women, it's with a relationship with a male. There's a very easy and quick way to get their attention, and they're really seeking affirmation. And so there's that draw initially. But for the women that are really considering, they want that as well in religious life, there's going to be a lot of doubt. Is God actually going to provide that to me? Do I have a close enough relationship with God that he, in this life, will provide for me that fulfillment that I can, it's easier I think to visualize being in marriage, because we're surrounded with models of it. It's much harder, I think, to imagine living a life of celibacy, or particularly like in an order, in a community, as a missionary or as a cloistered nun, that will I really be provided with that level of really like affection in a sense. And I think it's much harder for women in religious orders, because a lot of these women come in with strong relational deficits, meaning they don't, it's hard for them to relate easily and authentically to others because of fear of being rejected. And so they kind of have to put on maybe appearances or show that they're unaffected by certain things emotionally, and they're not really well connected. But when you go into a cloistered order, you're actually in some ways discouraged from having particular relationships. Like, so if you have disagreements or, frustrations, which happen, it's hard to actually be given time to speak one-on-one with your fellow sisters, and it can end up feeling extremely lonely and isolating. And so those are things to consider, even, when choosing an order. They're like families. And they're dysfunctional families. I had this idea of religious orders being like this havens of bliss, being just this close to heaven, and everybody was so patient and compassionate.
Wait a minute, didn't you see The Sound of Music?
I did. It's been a while.
Do and all the things, and she shouldn't be here. And did you see Maria? And no. Yep. Not that I think they're all like that, no. But I do believe it's just human nature, right? I mean, right. And you've got a group of 30, 40, 50 women, and by nature, we are more emotive. We feel so deeply, and we emote those feelings so much. So I think that it's ripe for all of that. So if you're not if you're not that whole person, right? If you have those deep wounds going in, then it's going to manifest, I think, and blow up, because everything would have a magnifying glass on it, because in religious life, just from the times I've been in convents for several days at a time, there's a lot of order.
Yes.
Right? I mean, every morning at this time, this is when this happens. Then this happens, and then this happens. It's ordered throughout the day. So there's not a lot of room for drama. Right. I mean, there's really not. And any Reverend Mother would definitely want to tamper down on drama. And the way you can do that is to have a healthy, happy, holy person going in. So I see
Absolutely.
where that your services are so important, and I see what you're saying.
And I think, really simply what, kind of an action item that, I really challenge the women listening tonight is just, you know, consider if you're struggling with this, what you should do. Allow yourself some time, in reflection, whether it's in, your own room in quiet or in a chapel in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Just give yourself the freedom to ask yourself, what do I really want? I'm really thinking, choosing between marriage and religious life. If God was sitting here before me and said, I am equally happy with whichever route you choose, where is my heart inclining me towards? And I think it's really important to attend to, because you're here tonight because you're earnest about loving the Lord, about, living your life in a way to follow the two great commandments. And you're just trying to figure out the best way to do it. And God really is allowing you the choice to go to heaven through whichever one, you're willing to commit to. But trust in your discernment. Trust that you desire what's good, and God is accompanying you. I think we tend to relate to God in ways in which we experience Him as very distant and kind of like sitting back, like waiting, like for us to do something, and then He'll respond, as opposed to Him being with us and saying, what is it that you want? And if it's something that's going to be good for you, He's going to help you to really realize that. And that might be the first time you can really feel a sense of clarity of what direction you want to go. Then you can deal with all the doubts of like, because as soon as you name that, guess what's going to happen? Your psyche is going to come in with this flood of, well, you should this, you shouldn't do that. Here are all the worst case scenarios of how that decision will go bad, poorly. And
Right. But I think that we can utilize that in a lot of ways. Like, I always feel like we should do, here's Frozen 2. I don't know if you have seen Frozen 2, but it's about all of the main thing. One of the main things that comes out of this is just do the right next thing. And so, if we've been praying and we've been asking the Holy Spirit to guide us and we feel called to it, I think that to try and to go and do the next right thing, go to come and see, go contact that vocation directress. And if it is God's will, it will be easy. It will happen. That doesn't mean that there won't be some roadblocks, but I mean, it will happen more easily. I feel like when it's just us and it's really not God's will, and we try to push something through, that the barriers come, and then there's things aren't right. And there's not peace and all of that.
Yeah, and I think one thing for women in particular that you have an advantage in most of the religious orders that you would be considering is that there isn't a rigid timeline from which you enter, say, an postulancy, a novitiate, into your final vows. Like, it could be quite a while, and it's sort of a, we're going to have you profess final vows when they really think that you've developed and you're ready. And that can be very difficult for women in terms of waiting, obviously, but there should be some reassurance that, if you take that step and you go, I think even though intellectually, no, I'm not making my final vows when I enter, depending upon our personalities, it might be very difficult to conceive of, like, once I start something, I have to finish it.
Well, I do believe it's very hard. I mean, because you're talking about family. Like, meaning you've put your heart into this, you now become part of this family. And when you discern out, you're leaving your heart with this family. I mean, that it's hard on both sides. Like, I've talked to sisters who say, well, one day they were here and then the next they left, and it's just, I think it's very hard for both sides of this process. I mean, it's natural, and this is what we have to do, but I do feel it's very difficult.
Right. And I've seen something similar in terms of like marriage preparation. I've had the opportunity to be a consultant for diocesan marriage tribunals. You know, you look back at the history and you see how the relationship developed. And even in marriage prep classes that I've given, I can't tell you how many times I've listened to a woman or a man say, "Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of problems in this relationship, but I'm not going to get out because, you know, I can't imagine someone else loving me or accepting me. I can't imagine, like, we've already made reservations. It's going to look, you know, it's going to look bad. It's going to be embarrassing. I've already imagined my life with them and I don't want to back away." But, you know, with the men in seminary, it's really even more problematic because for the most part with diocesan seminaries, once you step foot on a campus seminary, you've got to save the date. They know when your ordination date is going to be, and everybody publicly knows it. So if you take any time away or if you discern out, it's very threatening to some of the individuals because too much of their identity has been placed in becoming ordained. And that's another thing to think about. If you're searching a religious life, how much of this am I doing it because, you know, it's going to fulfill something in my sense of self, which is a good thing if you have the freedom to seek it out because you already trust that God loves you, He dwells within you, and you have the freedom to do this because it's just you desire, as opposed to I doubt myself and I'm hoping by doing this, by being a sister, I'll feel value, I'll feel worth. Like it's easier for me to imagine that God is pleased with me. And that's really important. And that's hard to really reflect upon. So if you're doing any reflection and writing things in a journal, I always recommend, you know, take at least 2 or 3 passes at it. Like write down your initial thought and then challenge yourself. You know, did I write this down in the most uncensored fashion? And then do it again, because it's hard to get to like what we're really feeling, desiring, or fearing. It might be something we don't want to acknowledge.
Sure. No, that's great advice. And I do believe that women, for the most part, journaling is a very good exercise through this. So if you haven't picked up a pencil or pen, ladies, that may be a really good idea, is just to start there and start writing down how you're feeling about this, because there are women in this group who will be watching this who they've only just recently begun thinking about this, or they feel God has just recently put this on their hearts. Probably better way to say it. And then there's some that are about to enter. I mean, they run the gamut with 450 women in here. So I feel like we giving these really practical tools will help them. Have you found any exercises out there for journaling, or is there any way you in particular envision that happening on a daily basis? When I did it journaling, I would just journal like what I was grateful for that day, and you know what happened. It was more of a diary, of what was going on in my life. I don't think that's what we're getting at here. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, great question. A couple suggestions I would have. If you have a very specific concern, I think then it's easier to target in a journal, dedicating some specific pages just to thoughts that are related to that. And I would target like worst case scenarios. What's my worst case scenario with this given situation? With the intention of showing it to your spiritual director so that they can really get access to what those deepest fears are, and maybe help you, having a third party and someone that you trust, through prayer, guiding you through that. You might have a therapist, same thing. And they love any type of self-reflection you're doing outside of sessions you can bring, and they can help you process, ask you questions to help you gain even more insight into those things. If you're someone that struggles, like I hate journaling, I don't know what to write, and I'm worried I have to come up with paragraphs to describe how I'm feeling. There's a relatively new method called the bullet journal method. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Rhonda, but there's an author by the name of a writer, Carol, and I think it came out in the last 4 or 5 years, but it's a very organized way of like 1 page for a day where you can actually record things to do, but it makes it an easy way to record observations of yourself. And a way to reference those pages, even if you're like randomly like every 3rd or 4th page, it seems very organized. There's a numbering system that helps you to access and remember, okay, on this date, I was doing some journaling while I was in the chapel, and you can actually get to it easily and reference it. And it's just like in the moment, capturing thoughts, because when we let time elapse, it's much more difficult, I think, to really get the essence of what I was, thinking or feeling in that moment. And I have no financial connection with the bullet journal method, but I recommended it a lot to patients. I've been utilizing it myself because I need help with organization. So.
Well, good. Thank you. That's perfect. So I think there was the next item you were going to talk about was identifying and challenging fears, both realistic and unrealistic, that foster avoidance and emotional turmoil and making a vocational choice. So I think that you might have touched on a little bit of this, but give us some more thoughts.
Sure. So these are things that really, I think, lead us to a place where we just remain frozen. Not you brought it up with the movie, but that anxiety, leads to one of 3 responses: fight, flight, or freeze. Usually in its highest state, but there's all kinds of fears that we are going to come up with and dwell on that will paralyze us and interfere in our ability to make a decision moving forward. And I'm sure a lot of you listening, have experienced this, that it's so uncomfortable not knowing, and there's people in your lives that you're afraid to let go of. If you make this decision, you might be in a relationship and it's killing you because you're considering letting go of that to pursue the Lord. And because you don't have certainty about which is going to be best, you may spend months, years delaying that decision. And when you realize, like, if you make the leap forward, even if it's the more difficult one that you're considering, and some of the things you're worried about occurring and making that decision happen, for example, let's say you break up with your boyfriend or your fiance, maybe you're engaged, and you enter formation, and after a year, you realize that, I don't feel peace with this. I don't feel called to be here. Maybe just the order. Why did I do this? I think you'll be surprised at where you're at that point, where you'll have some greater clarity of what you want and where to take your next step. And the discomfort that comes with that pales in comparison to the torture you underwent for the year or 2 years before you made the decision. And I think that's applicable to a lot of people who are struggling to make any big decisions, like choosing a school, taking a new job in a different city. And we want to weigh the pros and cons. We want to make the perfect decision. And there really is no perfect decision, and we're never going to have certainty. And we just kind of have to, as Christ says to the disciples, like, just put out into the deep. And he's not testing us, like, show me, like, I'm, again, prove to me you can swim the deep water. He's like, he was with them. He's like, trust me, you can be out in the deep because I'm with you, and it will seem scary, but I'm never going to abandon you. So just breaking through whatever's holding us back, can relieve a lot of tension that we've been holding on to for a long time in and of itself. So what are those things that hold us back? You know, I think some of the common themes and issues are just general self-doubt. And I think if we're struggling with self-doubt or insecurity, we're going to have it no matter what path we choose, right? You know, I want to be a wife and a mother, but I don't believe I can be successfully. Or I want to enter religious life, but I don't believe that I'll make it through, you know? And I see this with people who, they have this doubt in academics, but they're 4.0 students. And other people are amazed. They're like, what are you talking about? You're getting a 4.0. But for them, they're still so afraid of failure that like A's are just relief to them, not something to be celebrated. And if they take that approach to their academics, guarantee you they're going to take that into their spiritual life, in their formation. And yeah, they're putting an unrealistic set of expectations upon themselves they can't meet. And so I see that with those that are considering religious life, those that are considering or in marriage. They're like, I know the person I want to marry, but there's part of me that just, it's hard to see how they will not eventually be disappointed in me.
Right.
And they feel that way about religious orders. This order thinks I'm amazing, but wait till they get to know me. You know, they're stuck with me, or they ask me to leave. And these are distorted thoughts, but I can't tell you how common they are. The self-doubt that your average person is dealing with is significant. And they may not meet criteria for any psychological, you know, disorder. But tremendous amounts of insecurity. Yeah, can I really do this? Can I succeed? Can I be happy? I can imagine myself living religious life, and it may not be about even an issue about celibacy. It might just be about that lifestyle, you know, and being cut off and away from family and friends that I'm used to encountering them. Can I actually be happy in that life? Or is it just simply my edification is going to come from being self-sacrificial?
Some of that, I don't think you can know.
No.
Some of that takes that leap of faith to go find out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary. That's what you're saying. It's fear. There's a real fear there because you're being disappointing anybody or in disappointing yourself and being turned away and being told, because, you know, discernment is two-way street. And so these women know that they're being evaluated on how well they fit in. And if the Reverend Mother and the book Novice Mistress really think they can do this and be a part of this religious life, because nobody wants an unhappy sister. Nobody wants that. No order wants that. I mean, you know, that's so many people say, right? That is the one thing the one characteristic of sisters. Everybody, when they're around them, they're like, oh, they're so full of joy, you know, and we want that. We want them to be joyful, but at the same time, that realistic? And when you're looking at it from the outside to go, oh, boy, if I were in there, they wouldn't be so joyful, like whatever it may be.
Right. Well, and yeah, and that's another topic too, because I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of women in actually religious communities, and yeah, really amazed in a way, and humbled by what a lot of the women would reveal in terms of, you know, a lot of issues that they brought in and are not resolved simply by being in a very, you know, deeply prayerful life. And I mean, like family wounds, doubts about self-perfectionism and scrupulosity, you know, run rampant. And I think that's another thing, Rhonda, is for most of us, we really do have we lack a freedom to fail. And for most of us as earnest Catholics, like that word is really uncomfortable. Like, what does that mean? You know, we have to succeed, but there's only one real failure, and that's that's hell. Everything else that we do, like God is merciful. He gives us a way to address it. And for those that are really perfectionistic, this is like the worst thing they can hear, because like, you know, I've had individuals come to me for help with these perfectionistic tendencies. And I'm like, here's a remedy. I want you to do less, you know, first of all. And they look at me like they came for a nutritional assessment. I said, hey, I want to give you some arsenic. This is going to be good for you. It's like, to them, it's like poison. But it's what the expectations they have on themselves. Once they're okay with failure from their standpoint, it's not real failure. They actually are much more relaxed. They do things more efficiently, and they enjoy them more because they can be present.
So are you talking about failure? Because because we don't normally use those terms when we're talking about religious life or
Right.
discerning out, because that's never a failure if you give God time, right? But I just think you mean that in general, if a person has a hard time accepting their weaknesses and things when they're not doing well, right? Is that what you're getting at, right? And they don't do it well, they're falling down, they're sinning, their confession, saying the same thing over and again.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of failures is what we're saying. That then what happens when that enters into religious life? You're saying that when they get really prayerful and there's more time of such reflection, that can turn into something spiral kind of out to scrupulosity. Is that what we're saying, or you're saying?
It can, but I would say before they even enter, it's like there's those things you just mentioned, but also failure takes the form of the outcomes that I envision in my life not working out. So like if I envision entering religious life and I can say, well, what if I really dislike it and I choose to leave? That person might actually consider that a failure. And it's not a failure, right? Because they've given their time to the Lord, they've learned more about themselves, hopefully they've grown closer. But there's a lot of individuals that before they even enter and just picture that happening will see it as a failure. That's why, you know, in the seminaries, I worked with a lot of men in formation classes. For them, it's ordination or bust. To them, that would be failure. To not go on to ordination, they see it as like the greatest failure in their life, when it's not. Like, if it leads you and your discernment to choosing another vocational path, and you're freer to do it, and you're happier in it, and you have a better relationship with others, free to relate and to receive love and give love, everyone wins. Like the church wins because you're healthier. Rhonda, you and I win because the communion of saints, there's souls out there that are now freer to share Christ's love, and it's not a failure. But on a psychological level, that is a big impediment, I think, to a lot of people who are trying to decide, you know, marriage or religious life. I can't. Once I started, I have to finish it, because they see it as a failure. And that's why a lot of people stay in bad relationships and go on and get married, because they see it as a failure, personal failure, if they back out.
Wow. And yeah, I've seen it too. And unfortunately, it's not always their doing.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, I know that some people feel a lot of pressure from the outside once people know that you're discerning religious life or enter seminary. But let's focus on religious life. So you've told these people that, yeah, you think this might be what God's calling you to.
Right.
And then to have to say, no, it didn't work out. Sorry, I changed my mind. I mean, just that fear of having to say that, and that what people will think of us. So there's a whole nother one, I would imagine, that just what people think of you. I mean, I don't know who doesn't deal with that on a regular basis.
Yeah, for a variety of things. I mean, I definitely relate to that, because my second time that I thought I was going to seminary, my spiritual director had told me in a meeting, his question to me was, he looked at me, he's like, so how long are you going to make him wait? And I knew what he meant, in terms of responding to Christ's call to religious life. And I remember being relieved. I got goosebumps thinking about it. And then I just broke into tears because, I realized, wow, it's humbling to feel that I'm called. And I also realized what I had to do because I was in a relationship and I was, debating about whether to stay in. And it was like this confirmation, like I have to let her know and I have to step away, which I did. And she was super gracious. I'm very grateful for her. And for the next 3 months, I was miserable because I realized it was something I felt I should do. I thought my spiritual director was the voice of the Holy Spirit, magisterial teaching coming down and telling me what I needed to do. And so I'm like, okay, if God wants me to do it, I'll do it. And as time went on and I reflected more, it kept coming back to me something I should do. So after 3 months, and I was losing my mind, like I could not eat, like I was having a hard time focusing at work. And I came to him and I said, Father, like, this is killing me. I said, I don't think I'm called to be a priest. He says, good. And I wanted to choke him. Like I really wanted to, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I just totally changed my life. And now you're telling me, like, kind of flippantly, oh, good for you. And I'm like, how can you say that? And he's like, no, he's like, I'm not the Holy Spirit. He said, I felt that at that time, I was being honest with you. That was my impression. But it sounds like you've come to your own realization. This is not where you're called. You don't have peace about it. So good. That's actually a really healthy thing for you now to direct your life. And I thought I just messed up my life. Like this was the woman I was supposed to marry. Ended up being an amazing thing that God gave to me because I needed to step out of that relationship and I wouldn't have met my current wife. if
There you go. That's a good
right.
way to look at it. I mean, you don't know what God has in store for you when you say no,
Right.
or when you say, I don't think this is it. There's still another path. There's still, I mean, he's calling you to be a saint. And if your vocation is what's going to get you there, and if the vocation isn't to be a sister, then embrace whatever he's got calling you to. I mean, there are a lot of women in here that are as well discerning consecrated virginity, which is a whole nother, being on your own with Jesus, being that spouse, but not communal.
Right.
Or consecrated women. Now they're going to be more communal. You're going to live in community like sisters, but the consecrated virginity, that's a whole nother thing to be preparing yourself for. It's not quite as many women discerning that, but I have to say there are quite a few in here. And I think that's another level, a lot of different questions to ask yourself if you're prepared to live alone with Jesus. Like if you can't do that, then that's why I think that so many dioceses make women wait so long. Like I know women who've waited like 6 years, 7 years to become a consecrated virgin in a diocese. But I think it's because it has to be demonstrated in such a big way. I guess it's kind of like when you enter religious life, you're waiting 6 or 7 years for that final profession.
Yeah, and I apologize for neglecting that group.
That's okay.
That group, but I think it really comes down to the freedom for them to choose that or to choose a particular order. In my case, in God's mercy, like I did not encounter my vocation until I was free to just be. I didn't have to be in either. So first time in my life, I felt a lack of pressure to be in religious life or to be married. I could just be and actually engage my community, friends around me, my work. And it was so freeing. And I felt closer to God because I didn't feel like he was sitting back disappointed because I wasn't one of those two. And then in his sense of humor, then I run into my wife. But when I met her, I still had a freedom. I didn't feel I had to be in the relationship. It didn't have to result in marriage, but it was a freedom to actually consider the choice. And I think that's something I'd want all of you to consider. Do I right now, do I feel okay where I'm at? Like, would that be okay if I'm just here for a while? And not have to. but it's good that you're considering and wanting to figure out where your heart's moving.
Yes. Yes. And I feel like, so what Naomi is asked, marriage is meant to be free, total, faithful, and fruitful. Would you speak a bit to the women discerning her vocation that doubts her freedom to enter any vocation at the present moment?
Mm.
So she doubts that freedom that she has, that it's her, that it is that, I mean, God gives us free will, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, particularly for these reasons, like, you know, to figure this
Right.
out, because he wants us to give of our total self, right? That it's our choice to give,
Mm-hmm.
not something God's mandating us to do. You can speak way better than I can, but I mean, I just.
Well, you've probably encountered anything that I'm about to address. You've probably encountered in some way, shape, or form in conversation or with a variety of souls that you interact with. But that's a great question. There's a lot that can be explored in terms of, like, we're never going to be completely healthy or completely free in a way, like on a, you know, it operates on a continuum. On one end is like complete freedom, and another end is like, you know, kind of in a psychotic state. We can't actually determine anything, but we should be somewhere here in the middle, closer to this one end of free will. The question that I ask, you know, whether somebody's preparing for consecrated life, religious life, or marriage is, do you have to do this? And if the question is yes, and you have, then ask yourself another set of questions: why? Why do I have to do this? Is it so, you know, this is the only way that I can be happy? Is it the only way that I can imagine God loving me? That's one thing. But I think that in order to know whether I'm free, I think it's really to explore my insecurities. Where are my self-doubts? And that actually leads me to maybe why I'm leaning one way or the other, which could be unhealthy. Discernment of Spirits. I know Father Gallagher writes a lot about, you know, this in terms of consolations and desolations from Ignatian spirituality is also really helpful too. When I think about a choice, what sense of peace does that give me? From a psychologist standpoint, how does my body react? Like, if it's something I'm truly, I think, free to choose, I should have a sense of calm in the muscles in my neck and my shoulders and my chest. I shouldn't have an anxious feeling in my stomach. I shouldn't want to feel like I'm going to vomit. You know, when I really consider it. You know, once I start if I come to that decision, I start pursuing it. Yeah, then like the reality hits, and maybe I get some butterflies on my stomach. But
That's
just
natural, because that means you care.
Right. But I think, yeah, exploring, you know, what causes me anxiety is really helpful, because that is going to help you identify what's maybe contributing to your avoidance of choosing something that you want to do and you've been talking yourself out of, you know, or become aware of something that you might be using a particular vocation in order to compensate for those insecurities. I think I see that far too often, whether it's religious life or marriage. I'm doing this to compensate for not feeling love, not that I'm not good enough in some way, shape, or form.
I think you mentioned that several times. So obviously it's something that comes up a lot. I mean, gosh, I mean, I know
most
that.
Common thing.
I mean, well, I mean, I think it's not just discerning religious life that you're going to find this. This is just, I think that's part of this, Dr. Glafke, is that just realizing that it's not just because you're discerning religious life that this is how you feel, that
Right.
you women of the veil, you're actually doing something that 99% of the population, they don't do this. They don't take the time to be self-reflective. They don't take the time to discover God's will. They're just whatever I want to do, whatever brings me pleasure, whatever, right? It's not a discernment. So I feel like what you are experiencing during discernment is completely natural. A lot of these things, I mean, but it doesn't mean that you don't need to work on them. But
Right.
just know that most women have these feelings.
Yeah, I think men and women, struggle with this. And another thing I want to add is that I think what actually adds to the difficulty looking deeply into those insecurities or things that we might be trying to address or compensate for with the vocation is for a lot of people that struggle with these issues, they don't come from families that on the surface look problematic. Like, you know, these are the families you're at mass and you see, mom and dad and 6 kids, and they look like this model of faith, and they're active in the community, and they must be really like relational and happy. But there's dynamics going on that are very subtle. Like, they're good. The parents are good people. They're imperfect because they're subject to the fall, so they love imperfectly. And there's sometimes some effects of certain personality dynamics and that people can't see when they're not in the home, and they contribute to all kinds of self-identity issues, insecurities, doubts. Parents may treat the male children differently than the female children, or the oldest different from the others. Expect a lot of the applicants that I have for religious life for women are usually the eldest child, and their identity became like they received affirmation from mom and dad, but mainly mom, because they were the helper. And so their identity became in like, if I help if I'm like the second mom, I get an affirmation. And so conceptually, it's like, yeah, I can do that in religious life, and, serving the poor, and in prayer, and, consecrating myself. Great. It's a good goal. It's a great goal, but there might be more to that. Like, I'm doing it. I'm not completely free. I need this in order to feel better, rather than I'm at peace and I have the freedom to choose this. And I can't wait to do it. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, great. Now God will lead me to the next door that will open.
Well, and I think that's such good advice for everybody. But I think that so many women who are discerning feel very alone in their discernment, because they may come from small town anywhere, big town anywhere. They don't know anybody else discerning. Like, they don't have anybody to walk with them through this. They have a hard time finding a spiritual director. They've stumbled upon the veil, and they're finding some women who are going through some of the same things they are. But I just think it's a struggle, I feel like, for women specifically who are discerning this vocation to find community with each other.
Absolutely. And then the other factor is that loneliness gets increased when you do tell people you trust them, and then they start acting differently around you.
Yes.
Right?
Oh yeah, you're going into convent. We can't say that.
Right.
Oh yeah, we can't go there.
Yeah, you won't want to be around us for this. You won't want to, I can't talk about this.
You're too holy for us. Oh my. And that's why so many people don't tell others people.
Right.
And then they keep it all to themselves, and I'm sure that's can cause issues too.
Oh yes, and you'll see that all that's bottled up, and it's likely to come out in all kinds of different physical issues: headaches, migraines, gastrointestinal problems, irregular periods. I mean, all kinds of back issues. I mean, the mind and body are so intimately connected, and like, you're literally suppressing all of this, and it's going to come out some way. And your body is telling you this isn't healthy. You need to be able to process this in a different way.
So if that's you, ladies, if that sounds familiar, we need to figure out a way to get some community. We need to get you talking with somebody about this, so that you can discern more freely without physical ailments, and really talk to somebody. So I don't know, Dr. Glafke, your wisdom is, I hope, is inspiring some of these ladies to say, maybe I could find somebody to help me to walk through this.
Absolutely.
So I hope it does. Do you know of so there are you're a psychotherapist, right?
Correct. Not a psychiatrist, but psychologist technically, but yeah, conduct psychotherapy and clinical assessments.
But there are others. It's not, you're not the lone one in the United States.
No, there's a growing group. We're still small, but there is a growing number of Catholic therapists at a variety of different levels, master's levels, doctoral levels, and it's really expanding throughout the country. There's a couple resources I would recommend.
Do that, yes.
Yeah, Catholic Therapists, plural.com, all one word. A site I don't have any affiliation with, but no Dr. Ricciardi, she's the one that runs that site, but it's a great database that's easily searchable. Type in your city, your state, and it'll bring up Catholic therapists near you. You know, it may not be like 10 miles away, it may be 60 miles away. What I like about this site isn't just a name and a phone number. There's a bio, and you can click on those links and it'll tell you a little bit about them, their approach to their faith. They have to answer, questions. Do they attend mass? Do they go to daily mass, weekly mass? Do they support the teachings of the magisterium? And what type of approach do they take? What populations do they serve? That's a resource. I would also...
And that, so tell me the name of that website again.
It's CatholicTherapists.com.
So it's Catholic Therapists with an S on the end, .com. Okay, great. Okay.
Yep. It's free to use.
Okay.
Also it's not an exhaustive list, but, talking to, your priests or those spiritual directors, they might have word of mouth referrals. There's a Catholic Psychotherapy Association that has a website. And I'm not sure I think their directory might be searchable, and you can look up and see they will have other names that might not be contained on the CatholicTherapist.com. That's Catholic Psychotherapy Association. The web venture that I'm involved in, soulsandhearts.com, is a Catholic resource that provides a lot of free material. There's video series, there's podcasts that address a variety of psychological issues. There's some paid courses, like the one that Dr. Crete and I have, titled Be Called, Discerning and Living Out Your Vocation. If anyone's interested, Rhonda can give you a discount code. It's like a $60 course, but you get 20% off. But it helps the exploration of like things that might be impediments to making a choice, related to depression, anxiety, procrastination, sexual attachments, anxiety about discovering God's will. There's specific lessons on that. But it is a matter of faith looking for a therapist if that's what you're trying to target, because what sources do you trust? But Catholic Therapist has been one I utilize a lot.
Good. Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight, Dr. Glafke. I really feel like you've helped unpack a lot of this and just giving us, there's a lot of hope there that, because obviously, you're working with a lot of men and women who say yes, and that they continue and they go forth. This isn't just because you're seeing a therapist doesn't mean that something's so wrong with you that nobody can love you and that God can't love you. That he's actually giving us this opportunity to work through things so that we can love ourselves and find what God wants for us ultimately.
Yeah, so, and there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of hope for addressing a lot of those natural issues. And there's a lot of trepidation about psychology for good reason, but grace builds upon nature. And the things that are leading you to feel frozen in making your choice are a combination of natural issues, meaning things that you've experienced in your life and those self-doubts and insecurities, and supernatural. The devil hates you. The devil doesn't want you to live out a healthy vocation. So he wants to pile on to those insecurities and get in your ear and say, you can't do it. You'll be terrible. You'll be miserable. You won't be happy. So
let's not let the devil win.
Correct.
Let's work on this, ladies, by yourself with a journal. Find a therapist, get a spiritual director if you don't have one, for sure, and keep searching. And whatever God's will is, and get on soulsandhearts.com.
Yep.
Right. And look that up, and I'll be posting the code for you too, as well, if you want to hear some more from Dr. Glafke. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And if anybody has any questions and you want to forward them on to me via email or whatever, I'd be happy to answer them for them.
Great. So you heard that. If you have questions, just post them on this live, and we'll get them over to Dr. Glafke. All right. All right. God bless you.
All right. Thank you. God bless.